October 24, 1942, marked a pivotal moment on Guadalcanal, specifically at Henderson Field. Under the cloak of dense jungle darkness, a formidable force of 3,000 Japanese soldiers stealthily advanced towards a single battalion of United States Marines, who had established defensive positions along a muddy ridgeline. The prevailing calculations of military strategy strongly suggested an inevitable massacre, given the overwhelming numerical superiority of the Japanese, holding a 3-to-1 advantage. These were elite Japanese troops, hardened veterans who had achieved sweeping victories across China and Malaya, now arrayed against American defenders who were severely depleted, having subsisted on half rations for 2 arduous months. Every established military manual underscored a grim truth: once attacking infantry engaged in close quarters, hand-to-hand combat, the decisive edge invariably shifted to the side, possessing a greater number of bayonets. In this stark reality, the Japanese commanders commanded a staggering 3,000 bayonets, while Colonel Chesty Puller's Marines numbered a mere 700. However, embedded deep within the rain-soaked earth amidst the American defenders, lay a series of innovative armaments destined to fundamentally alter all preconceived notions regarding infantry combat. These were not the formidable heavy machine guns, nor the long-range artillery shells typically launched from miles behind the front lines. Instead, they were something entirely different: slender tubes, so compact that a single soldier could easily transport one, and so ingeniously simple in their design that they contained no complex moving parts, save for the projectile smoothly descending the barrel. These were the very weapons that Japanese military intelligence had largely dismissed as mere ancillary support equipment, barely warranting a mention in their meticulous pre-battle assessments. The impending assault was scheduled to commence in just 4 hours. And in that profound darkness, Edgar Brandt's nearly 2-decade-old vision for preserving the lives of soldiers was poised to clash dramatically with Imperial Japan's ancient 2,000-year-old martial code dictating how warriors ought to meet their demise. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. The genesis of how a French artisan ultimately played a crucial role in safeguarding an American airfield traces back 23 years prior, to a city utterly unconnected to either entity, Paris, in the year 1919. While the intricate negotiations for the Treaty of Versailles unfolded within the opulent confines of gilded diplomatic halls, Edgar Brandt, a distinguished artist, was engaged in his daily routine, traversing his bustling metalwork atelier situated on the historic Rue de la Fontaine. He moved past magnificent wrought iron gates, meticulously crafted and destined for prestigious embassies, and intricate ornamental grillwork, designed to adorn the hallowed halls of the Louvre Museum. At 39 years old, Brandt had cultivated a formidable reputation as an Art Deco metalsmith, whose peacetime renown was built upon his extraordinary ability to manipulate iron with such finesse that it appeared to flow like liquid. He created sweeping curves and elaborate patterns that seemed utterly impossible, given the inherently unforgiving nature of the material. Yet, for 4 preceding years, his creative energies had not been channeled into art. Instead, those years had been dedicated entirely to the grim manufacture of weaponry. The harrowing experience of the Great War had imparted a profound lesson to Brandt, a truth that most artists never grasped, and which many military generals steadfastly refused to acknowledge. He had witnessed, with his own eyes, French infantrymen perishing by the thousands in devastating assaults across open, exposed terrain, cut down mercilessly before they could even reach the German positions. He had observed his nation sacrifice an entire generation of its young men because they were unable to provide artillery fire close enough to their own advancing troops without inadvertently causing friendly casualties. The fundamental issue was not a lack of valor. French soldiers had, without question, displayed immense bravery in their deaths. The core problem was one of geometry. Artillery pieces, positioned miles behind the front lines, launched shells along flat trajectories that made it impossible to accurately drop projectiles into enemy trenches without simultaneously endangering the very men who were assaulting those trenches. While heavy mortars possessed the capability to fire in high arcing trajectories, allowing shells to descend almost vertically, their immense weight, often hundreds of pounds, rendered them impractical for forward movement alongside attacking infantry. Machine guns, though capable of advancing with the troops, lacked the ability to reach adversaries concealed within trenches and shell holes. There existed a critical void, a lethal chasm, between the limited armaments that infantry soldiers could carry and the effective, safe fire support that artillery could provide. This devastating gap had claimed the lives of over 1 million French citizens. Brandt perceived this gap through a different lens than military officers. The officers tended to conceptualize solutions in terms of existing weaponry and how to optimize its deployment. Brandt conversely thought in terms of metal composition, the principles of physics, and the specific functions that various shapes could perform. He was an artist who intuitively understood that form must invariably follow function, and an engineer who recognized that the most effective design was inherently the simplest one. The innovative weapon he envisioned was not intended to supersede traditional artillery. Rather, it was designed to furnish every infantry company with its own localized artillery capability. It needed to be sufficiently compact for 2 men to transport, simple enough for soldiers to operate without requiring specialized artillery training, precise enough to land shells within mere meters of their own forward positions, and lightweight enough to advance seamlessly with the attacking infantry. He conceptualized a basic design, a tube, a stable base plate, and a bipod, nothing more elaborate. There was no need for a complex breech mechanism, an intricate recoil system, or sophisticated sighting equipment. Instead, it was simply a smooth steel tube designed to leverage gravity and a propellant charge to launch small shells along high arcing trajectories. The operation was straightforward. Drop the shell down the tube, allow the firing pin at the bottom to ignite the propellant, and let the laws of physics accomplish the rest. He chose to call it a mortar, employing an ancient term for a venerable weapon. Yet there was absolutely nothing ancient about the ground-breaking design he had created. The French Army conducted rigorous tests on his prototype in 1919 and found its simplicity almost astonishing. It measured 60 millimeters in diameter and had a total weight of just 42 pounds. A 19-year-old conscript could be proficiently trained to operate it within a single afternoon. It boasted an impressive rate of fire, capable of launching 15 rounds per minute, delivering 3-pound high explosive shells up to a distance of 1,700 meters. More significantly, it possessed the unique ability to drop those shells almost vertically, meaning it could precisely strike targets located in trenches, behind protective walls, or within gullies, essentially anywhere infantry required close fire support but could not obtain artillery assistance without incurring risk to themselves. While its effective radius was modest and its explosive charge relatively small, the weapon's unparalleled mobility, its ability to accompany infantry wherever they went, fundamentally transformed the dynamics of ground combat. The French army officially designated it the Mortier-Brant model, 1927, initiated its production, and soon observed other nations' militaries taking keen notice. The United States Army closely observed French military exercises featuring the Brant mortar in 1931, and immediately grasped the revolutionary nature of the weapon. American infantry doctrine at that time had been largely shaped by the experiences of men who had fought in the Great War, individuals who vividly remembered the brutal reality of attacking without adequate close fire support. Consequently, the U.S. Army dispatched a specialized team to thoroughly evaluate the weapon. They conducted extensive test firing at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. They meticulously disassembled the mortar, scrutinizing every single component. They measured, weighed, timed, and calculated every relevant parameter. Following this exhaustive assessment, they made a decision that would ultimately alter the course of the Pacific War 6 years before that conflict even began. They purchased the complete production rights, which encompassed not merely a license to manufacture under French oversight, but also comprehensive technical documentation and the explicit right to modify the design as American industrial capabilities deemed appropriate. In 1932, the United States Army officially adopted the weapon as the M2 60mm mortar. While its bureaucratic designation was unremarkable and easily forgotten, its profound impact on future warfare would prove to be anything but. I am from a quiet town nestled in the heart of the American Midwest, a place far removed from the battlefields described in this video. The topic of military innovation, particularly how a seemingly simple design can dramatically alter the course of conflict and save countless lives, is incredibly compelling. It's fascinating to see how a problem of geometry on the battlefield could be solved not by a general or a career soldier, but by an artist with an engineer's mind. It truly highlights the idea that groundbreaking solutions can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the simplest ideas are the most revolutionary. American industry, renowned for its ingenuity and efficiency, excelled at taking an existing concept and refining it for maximum utility and mass production. They streamlined Edgar Brandt's already straightforward design for a mortar to an even greater degree. While the French iteration of the weapon had tipped the scales at 42 pounds, the American version maintained this identical weight. In terms of operational tempo, the French model was capable of discharging 15 rounds per minute. However, the American variant, when manned by a proficient crew, could achieve an impressive rate of 18 rounds per minute. Furthermore, the sighting apparatus of the French mortar demanded meticulous upkeep and delicate handling, whereas its American counterpart featured sighting equipment so exceptionally resilient that it could withstand being dropped from a moving truck and still retain full functionality. Yet the most significant American contribution to this weapon was not primarily an engineering triumph. It was its unprecedented capacity for large-scale manufacturing. The sheer volume of production quickly distinguished the American effort. By the year 1940, the United States had fabricated a greater number of M2 mortars than France had managed to produce over an entire decade. This rapid proliferation meant that by 1941, every American rifle company had been equipped with a dedicated weapons platoon, which in turn incorporated a mortar section armed with 3 M2 mortars. By 1942, when the seasoned warriors of the 1st Marine Division disembarked onto the beaches of Guadalcanal, these mortars had become as ubiquitous and indispensable as their standard-issue rifles. The Marines transported them ashore with the same casual efficiency with which they carried essential supplies like ammunition and water. Merely another piece of vital equipment, another indispensable implement in their arsenal. At that juncture, no one harbored the belief that these seemingly modest weapons would ultimately prove pivotal to the outcome of the entire campaign. Edgar Brandt, the brilliant mind behind the original design, never set foot on the distant shores of Guadalcanal. He never encountered legendary figures like Chesty Puller or John Basilone, nor any of the countless Marines who would wield his innovative weapon in fierce combat. He remained in his beloved Paris throughout the arduous German occupation, diligently safeguarding his workshops from harm. Following the cessation of hostilities, he gracefully returned to his true artistic passion, dedicating his talents to crafting exquisite ornamental ironwork for prestigious museums and grand government edifices. His life concluded in 1960 at the venerable age of 79, a man celebrated primarily as an artist whose contributions to weaponry were relegated to a mere mention in his posthumous tributes. Nevertheless, on that fateful day of October 24, 1942, his 19-year-old visionary concept for infantry fire support was already firmly emplaced amidst the mire of a jungle ridge line situated a staggering 7,000 miles from the quiet elegance of Paris. There, it stood poised to be pitted against a formidable force of 3,000 men, who firmly adhered to the conviction that sheer courage and the cold gleam of steel could vanquish the brute force of industrial firepower. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Meanwhile, the Japanese 17th Army Headquarters, based at Rabaul, had been meticulously formulating their plans for the October offensive since the preceding month of September. Every single aspect of these intricate plans presupposed that Henderson Field could be successfully captured through a direct, ground-based infantry assault. Lieutenant General Haruki Hyakutake, who exercised authority over what was effectively a corps-level force dispersed throughout the Solomon Islands, had forged his renown through a mastery of logistics and inter-unit coordination rather than through any display of innovative battlefield acumen. He was universally regarded as proficient, systematic, and utterly orthodox in his strategic thinking. When he surveyed the situation on Guadalcanal, he perceived it as a problem that could be unequivocally resolved through the deployment of a sufficient number of soldiers, attacking precisely in the correct location at the opportune moment. Japanese intelligence assessed that the Americans likely had approximately 10,000 men stationed on the island, with their defensive positions appearing sparsely distributed around the vital airfield perimeter. Consequently, the logical conclusion, according to their established military theory, was that a focused offensive by premier forces directed at the most vulnerable sector would inevitably pierce the lines. This was textbook doctrine, a strategy that had proven successful in previous campaigns in China and Malaya, leaving no discernible reason to anticipate its failure on Guadalcanal. Therefore, Hyakutake entrusted the primary offensive operation to Major General Masao Maruyama and the renowned 2nd Infantry Division, famously designated as the Sendai Division in honor of its city of origin. These were not mere occupational forces or newly mobilized recruits. They were seasoned campaigners who had fought their way across China and played a crucial role in securing victory in Singapore. Their officers had undergone rigorous training at the esteemed Imperial Japanese Army Academy, and their enlisted men had been indoctrinated with the belief that death in battle represented the ultimate distinction a soldier could achieve. Maruyama himself embodied precisely the kind of leader most highly esteemed by Japanese doctrine. He exhibited profound personal valor, was prepared to spearhead assaults from the front lines, and possessed an innate ability to motivate his men to accept orders that were tantamount to self-sacrificial endeavors. He had famously led his forces across terrain that the Americans had deemed impenetrable, navigating through the thick nocturnal wilderness to gain the vital element of surprise. His tactical planning was audacious to the verge of temerity. However, such recklessness had yielded success before. The British had considered Singapore unassailable, yet Maruyama's division had secured its fall within a mere 70 days. The operational blueprint for Guadalcanal adhered strictly to the identical tenets that had ensured triumph at Singapore, an advance through the verdant wilderness that the enemy considered impassable, a nocturnal assault when American firepower would be diminished in efficacy, a concentrated strike at the most vulnerable sector of the perimeter, with superior numerical strength, a penetration in the initial surge, followed by a swift capitalization on the breach before the Americans could consolidate their defensive posture. The Japanese firmly believed that a combination of speed, shock, and a readiness to endure losses would subdue any American advantage in sheer firepower. The specific objective was a ridgeline situated to the south of Henderson Field, where Marine positions appeared lightly held. Intelligence reports indicated that this ridge was defended by approximately 1 battalion, numbering perhaps 700 or 800 men. Maruyama planned to attack with 3 infantry regiments comprising more than 6,000 soldiers. The first wave was tasked with piercing the defensive obstacles and subjugating the vanguard emplacements. The second wave would then capitalize on the breach and press onward to the airbase proper. By dawn on October 25th, Japanese flags were envisioned to fly triumphantly over Henderson Field, signifying that American air power in the Solomons would be entirely neutralized. What Japanese intelligence had critically failed to convey, primarily because Japanese intelligence lacked a fundamental comprehension of it, was the exact nature of the armaments those 700 Marines possessed. The reconnaissance teams that had meticulously scrutinized the Marine positions had indeed observed machine gun emplacements, rifle positions, and what superficially resembled some small artillery pieces. They had diligently tallied the armaments and assessed potential firing points. They had identified zones of engagement and probable routes of advance, but they had utterly failed to grasp the true nature of those diminutive cylindrical devices situated behind the Marine lines. Their reports had characterized these weapons as mere light support tools and estimated that while they might render the offensive more arduous, they certainly would not thwart its execution. Crucially, Japanese doctrine possessed no direct counterpart for the M2 mortar. And it is a common tendency to undervalue that for which one has no direct equivalent. The Japanese army certainly utilized battalion mortars and regimental mortars, but these were formidable armaments, typically deployed well in the rear of the forward positions and invariably manned by dedicated ordnance teams. The very concept that every rifle company might be equipped with its own organic mortar support, operated by foot soldiers themselves, and situated sufficiently near to engage adversaries, mere meters from Allied personnel, was entirely beyond the purview of the Japanese operational schema. Such a weapon did not align with their established paradigm of how infantry fought. Consequently, it did not figure significantly in their meticulous planning. The operational planners of the 2nd Division were meticulously preparing for their imminent engagement. On October 23rd, the 2nd Division initiated its arduous approach march, pushing through an exceedingly dense jungle where visibility was often restricted to a mere 10 meters. Each soldier was burdened with a minimal 4-day supply of rations, a quantity notably below standard doctrine, yet the maximum they could transport through the challenging terrain. Their individual loads comprised a rifle, essential ammunition, grenades, and personal effects. Crucially, the division's organic mortars and artillery pieces were deliberately left behind, deemed too cumbersome to traverse the jungle rapidly enough. This undertaking epitomized an infantry assault in its most fundamental form, a force of men armed primarily with rifles, bayonets, and machine guns, relying profoundly on their unwavering courage and rigorous discipline, with the firm conviction that these attributes alone would ensure their triumph. Major General Maruyama, embodying the very essence of leadership, spearheaded the advance, setting an exacting pace and exemplifying the remarkable endurance he anticipated from his troops. Their movement was characterized by an almost absolute silence, a testament to a level of noise discipline that would have commanded the respect of any seasoned professional army. During their brief halts, they maintained their positions without uttering a single word, preserving their stealth. Meals consisted of cold rice, a pragmatic choice to circumvent the revealing glow and smoke of cooking fires. This clandestine modus operandi was not new to them. They had honed these skills through prior engagements. Every man within the division harbored an unshakable belief in their impending success, a conviction forged by their intensive training, extensive combat experience, and deeply ingrained military doctrine, all of which unequivocally pointed towards victory. We encourage you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We would be grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. By the twilight hours of October 24th, the 2nd Division had successfully navigated the treacherous terrain to reach their designated assault positions, situated approximately 3,000 meters south of the marine perimeter. Despite the physical toll exacted by the arduous march, the troops were poised and resolute. Officers meticulously synchronized their timepieces and conducted a final, comprehensive review of the intricate assault plan. The offensive was slated to commence around 23,000 hours. The lead companies of the first wave were tasked with advancing to make contact, employing Bangalore torpedoes to breach the formidable barbed wire defenses, and subsequently overwhelming the forward enemy positions with decisive bayonet charges. Following closely at calculated intervals, the second wave companies would exploit any vulnerabilities or gaps created by the initial assault, pressing the advantage. The essence of their strategy was speed. Any hesitation was synonymous with death. Once the assault was unleashed, there would be no cessation of hostilities until they either secured Henderson Field or perished in the attempt. These were the immutable orders, a directive that had always underpinned their operational philosophy. Japanese infantry doctrine fundamentally eschewed contingency plans for failure, as even contemplating such an outcome implied its potential acceptability, which was unequivocally not the case. Their creed was absolute victory or death. There was no permissible middle ground. What Maruyama and his staff remained tragically unaware of, and indeed could not have known from their concealed vantage point deep within the jungle, was that their stealthy approach had already been compromised. At precisely 21:30 hours, Sergeant Ralph Briggs, stationed in an advanced observation post a full 3,000 meters ahead of the main marine lines, detected distinct movement within the dense jungle foliage. It was a significant amount of movement, the kind of pervasive sound generated by thousands of men, even when exercising the utmost caution and attempting absolute silence. He patiently waited, his senses acutely attuned, meticulously listening and estimating the sheer numbers based on the duration and intensity of the auditory disturbances. Subsequently, he grasped his field telephone and succinctly relayed a message to Lieutenant Colonel Louis Puller's command post. The communication was brief, direct, and entirely professional. About 3,000 Japanese between you and me. Following this critical report, he calmly resumed his position, preparing for the inevitable unfolding events. Behind him, within the Marine defensive lines, mortarmen were already diligently inspecting their equipment and systematically stacking ammunition in anticipation. Louis Burwell Puller, by October 1942, had dedicated 24 years of his life to the United States Marine Corps. Throughout this distinguished career, he had cultivated an almost preternatural intuition for anticipating the enemy's attack vectors. He was already a living legend within the Corps, a man who had been twice awarded the prestigious Navy Cross for his valorous actions in Nicaragua, where he had engaged in fierce guerrilla warfare amidst jungle terrain strikingly similar to that of Guadalcanal. His men affectionately referred to him as Chesty, a moniker derived from his imposing barrel chest and his characteristic gait, which involved thrusting it forward as if inviting any challenger. He had earned a formidable reputation for consistently being at the epicenter of the most intense fighting, not out of a desire for personal glory, but from a profound understanding that true officers led from the front, or they did not lead effectively at all. Consequently, when he received Sergeant Briggs's terse report at 21:30, he neither questioned the numerical estimate nor sought further confirmation. If Briggs stated 3,000 Fowlers, then it was unequivocally 3,000. Puller's 1st Battalion of the 7th Marine Regiment was responsible for defending approximately 1,000 meters of the southern perimeter, a sector that, within the next 4 hours, was destined to become the most perilous stretch of land in the entire Pacific theater. His defensive stronghold was strategically positioned along a low ridge line, oriented roughly east to west, densely overgrown with jungle vegetation and featuring natural terrain characteristics that served to funnel attacking forces into predictable and lethal kill zones. Puller had dedicated 2 months to meticulously enhancing these defensive positions, and he had placed his formidable array of weaponry with the surgical precision of a commander who deeply understood that properly positioned firepower multiplied its effectiveness tenfold compared to randomly scattered ordnance. His machine guns were sighted to establish intricate interlocking fields of fire that comprehensively covered all probable approaches. His rifle companies were ensconced in well-dug-in positions, complete with overhead cover and clear, unobstructed firing lanes. Furthermore, situated behind the main rifle line, at meticulously calculated distances and angles, were the pivotal weapons that would ultimately dictate the outcome of the impending battle. 9 M2 mortars, organized into 3 sections, each comprising 3 tubes. Each tube weighed a substantial 42 pounds. These weapons, simple enough for a corporal to command a section, possessed sufficient destructive power to shatter an infantry assault before it could even reach the defensive wire. The M2 mortar had been an integral part of Marine Corps service for a decade, but Guadalcanal marked its inaugural true test against a large-scale enemy offensive. The technical specifications of the M2 were rather modest when compared to heavier artillery pieces. Each shell weighed just over 3 pounds, with approximately half a pound of Composition B explosive packed within. Its maximum range was 1,700 meters, though its effective operational range was closer to 1,000 meters. A well-drilled crew could achieve a rate of fire of 18 rounds per minute, although this intense pace could not be sustained for extended periods, without risking the overheating of the mortar tube. The lethal radius against enemy troops exposed in the open was approximately 30 meters, diminishing considerably if the enemy was dug in or sheltered. On paper, these figures did not appear particularly formidable. The prospect of 3-pound shells confronting 3,000 attacking soldiers seemed akin to confronting a sword fight armed with merely a pocket knife. However, these bare specifications failed to capture the truly revolutionary aspect of the weapon. Its genius did not lie in the sheer size of the explosion, but rather in the precise location of the detonation and the remarkable speed with which subsequent explosions could be delivered. The M2's brilliance lay in its elegant simplicity and its geometric design. The tube itself was a smooth bore, devoid of rifling, which, while compromising long-range accuracy, simultaneously rendered the weapon virtually jam-proof and necessitated almost no maintenance. The firing mechanism was a fixed pin located at the base of the tube. A shell was merely dropped into the tube. It fell onto the pin ignited the propellant charge, and the shell was launched. There was no trigger to pull, no breech to close, and no complex mechanical systems susceptible to failure. The bipod and base plate provided essential stability, and the sighting mechanism was straightforward enough that even a minimally trained Marine could be accurately delivering shells onto a target within minutes of setting up the weapon. The M2 mortar, a weapon of deceptively simple design, offered a distinct tactical advantage over conventional artillery, primarily due to its unique firing trajectory. Unlike the relatively flat arcs necessitated by artillery pieces to clear friendly forces positioned between the gun and its intended target, the M2 projected its shells almost vertically. This steep ascent resulted in a near vertical descent, allowing it to strike targets nestled in defilade positions, such as the protective depths of trenches, the concealed folds of ravines, or the reverse slopes of hills, areas that traditional artillery simply could not reach. Furthermore, this characteristic trajectory meant that mortars could be deployed much closer to the front lines, enabling them to execute danger-close fire missions. Such operations involving ordnance landing perilously near Allied troops would have been deemed suicidal if attempted with the flatter, less precise arcs of artillery. The M2's capability thus provided an invaluable tool for direct, immediate support in the most contested zones of the battlefield. Colonel Puller, a seasoned commander, had strategically placed his mortar sections approximately 200 meters behind his forward rifle positions. This proximity was deliberate, affording the crews a clear line of sight over the intervening terrain, which was crucial for observing their fall of shot and making precise adjustments to their fire. Each 3 mortar section operated under the command of a non-commissioned officer, typically a sergeant or corporal, who bore the responsibility for directing the aim and timing the discharge of the tubes. The crews themselves were predominantly young Marines, many still in their teenage years, who had undergone their initial training on the M2 at stateside bases like Camp Lejeune or Camp Pendleton before deploying overseas. While they possessed a thorough theoretical understanding of the manual procedures, how to meticulously set the sights, accurately calculate range based on the tube's angle, and dynamically adjust fire in response to previous shell impacts, the stark reality of combat was a crucible entirely different from the training grounds. For most of these youthful combatants, this evening would mark their inaugural experience firing a mortar at an enemy actively seeking to take their lives. The necessary ammunition, meanwhile, lay meticulously pre-positioned in orderly stacks adjacent to each mortar tube, awaiting deployment. The ordnance consisted of high explosive shells fitted with impact fuses designed to detonate instantaneously upon contact with the ground or any solid obstruction. Each individual shell was carefully housed within a cylindrical container, ensuring it remained dry and protected from the elements. Throughout the afternoon, the diligent crews had undertaken the unglamorous but critical tasks of meticulously checking fuses, carefully wiping down propellant increments to ensure optimal performance, and arranging the ammunition in such a way that, even in the encroaching darkness, they would be able to locate and identify the specific rounds they required purely by touch. This was far from heroic work. It was the painstaking, often tedious, preparation that frequently distinguished units that survived from those that succumbed to avoidable errors. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video, for which we would be grateful for your like and subscription. Please also share a comment about your origin and your thoughts on the video's topic. Before nightfall, Puller personally inspected the mortar positions twice, meticulously assessing the fields of fire and confirming that the section commanders thoroughly grasped the intricate operational plan. The directive was clear. Upon the anticipated Japanese assault, the mortars would initially engage pre-plotted concentrations, targeting probable enemy assembly areas. Should the enemy advance reach the defensive wire, their fire would pivot to provide direct support to the rifle companies, dropping shells within a perilous 50 meters of friendly positions. In the dire event of a line breach, the mortars were to pour fire directly into the gap until their ammunition was expended, or the Japanese ceased their relentless advance. There was no contingency for withdrawal, for there was literally nowhere to retreat. Henderson Field, a mere 400 meters behind their lines, represented the ultimate strategic objective. If Puller's defensive line fractured, the airfield would be lost, spelling the catastrophic failure of the entire Guadalcanal campaign. The Marines, entrenched along the ridgeline, understood these profound stakes without needing explicit instruction. They had endured on the island since August the 7th, embroiled in a campaign whose full strategic intricacies eluded many, yet whose desperate importance was universally felt. They were thoroughly exhausted, chronically underfed, and ravaged by malaria and dysentery. Their uniforms, exposed to the relentless tropical humidity, were disintegrating on their bodies, and mail had ceased arriving weeks ago, leaving them isolated and uncertain if anyone back home even knew their whereabouts. Yet they were Marines, a designation that carried an unwavering resolve. They would hold their positions until explicitly ordered otherwise, or until death claimed them. Between these beleaguered men and an attacking force of 3,000 Japanese soldiers lay only strands of barbed wire, the firepower of machine guns, rifles, grenades, and 9 diminutive mortars, each weighing a mere 42 pounds. In 4 hours, the brutal test of their sufficiency would commence. The Japanese assault commenced precisely at 2300 hours, heralded by a flurry of artillery fire emanating from enemy guns situated several kilometers south of the marine perimeter. The incoming shells were predominantly small caliber, specifically 75 mm or less, generating considerable noise that effectively compelled the Marines to keep their heads down, thereby providing crucial cover for the advancing infantry. Puller, a veteran of numerous engagements, listened intently to the incoming barrage and immediately discerned its nature. It was a preparatory bombardment, not a sustained, overwhelming barrage. He correctly surmised that the Japanese forces on the island lacked the sufficient artillery assets required for a proper, prolonged preparation. This was merely a calculated distraction, a cacophony designed to mask the forward movement of their ground troops. He promptly relayed his assessment and a terse warning to his company commanders. "Stand by, they are coming." Concurrently, within the Japanese assault positions, officers meticulously synchronized their final preparations and movements. Captain Jiro Katsumata, commanding the 11th Company of the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Infantry Division, led a contingent of 200 men specifically chosen for this perilous assault due to their demonstrated absolute willingness to sacrifice their lives. Katsumata, a 28-year-old career officer, was a graduate of the esteemed Imperial Army Academy and had honed his martial skills during service in China. There, he had internalized the principle that truly aggressive leadership demanded personally leading charges with his sword dramatically drawn. His men held him in profound reverence, for he demanded nothing of them that he was not prepared to do himself. Tonight's mission, while conceptually straightforward, was virtually impossible in its execution. His company was assigned to the vanguard, the very first assault wave. Their objective was to advance through the dense, unforgiving jungle, to reach the barbed wire perimeter, breach it using Bangalore torpedoes, and then storm the Marine positions with fixed bayonets and grenades. Their mandate was unambiguous. They would either break through the enemy lines or perish in the attempt. Every man within the company understood these stark orders and had, without reservation, accepted them. Death, for them, was not a possibility to be evaded. Rather, it was the anticipated, and indeed the expected, outcome. The sole lingering question was whether they would fall after successfully accomplishing their mission or before. At 23:30 hours, the Japanese artillery barrage abruptly ceased, signaling the moment for the infantry to begin their forward movement. They advanced in disciplined company formations, diligently maintaining their intervals, moving with as much stealth as possible through the jungle. This natural terrain, by its very configuration, channeled them directly towards the Marine positions, precisely as Puller had shrewdly anticipated. The leading companies found their visibility severely hampered by the profound darkness and the thick, suffocating vegetation. Their navigation relied on compass bearings and the unerring guidance of their officers. Every few minutes they would pause, listen intently for any telltale sounds, and then resume their deliberate advance. The Marines were now agonizingly close, perhaps 500 meters away, or even less. Sound, in the peculiar acoustics of the jungle, carried in strange and deceptive ways, rendering accurate distance estimation nearly impossible. Captain Katsumata could distinctly hear the ragged rhythm of his own breathing, amplified by the tension and the heavy exhalations of the men surrounding him. The air was thick with the metallic tang of their sweat, intermingled with the pervasive, sickly, sweet stench of jungle rot that afflicted virtually everyone on the island. He could feel the familiar, reassuring weight of his sword at his side, a tangible anchor against the overwhelming expectation of the violent confrontation that lay immediately ahead. The ensuing events unfolded with brutal precision in the dead of night. At the stroke of midnight, the initial waves of Japanese forces reached the formidable barbed wire fortifications that guarded the base of the ridge. These intricate defenses, meticulously constructed by the Marines over a 2-month period, comprised multiple layers of wire, firmly anchored to robust palm logs and ingeniously enhanced with tin cans filled with small pebbles, designed to emit a telltale rattle upon disturbance. This labyrinthine barrier extended to a depth of 4 meters in certain sections, presenting a formidable challenge. Undeterred, Japanese engineers pressed forward, armed with Bangalore torpedoes, elongated metal tubes brimming with potent explosives intended to be thrust beneath the wire and detonated to carve a path through the obstruction. The stillness of the early morning hours was shattered at 00:15 hours by the first deafening explosion, a sharp, concussive crack that momentarily illuminated the dense jungle canopy. This blast rent a gap of approximately 2 meters in the wire. Instantly, a torrent of fire erupted from Marine machine gun emplacements strategically positioned further up the slope. Tracers, like fiery red arcs, sliced through the profound darkness. The cacophony was overwhelming, a relentless, percussive hammering that reverberated off the ridge line and through the surrounding jungle vegetation. The Japanese engineers responsible for detonating the Bangalore torpedoes perished before the echoes of the explosion had fully dissipated, yet the crucial breach was now open. Captain Katsumata, sword drawn and bellowing exhortations to his troops, his voice barely audible above the incessant machine gun fire, spearheaded his company's charge toward the newly formed gap. Around him, soldiers collapsed, mercilessly cut down by unseen fire emanating from unidentifiable positions. The Marines, firing indiscriminately into the darkness, relied on sound and movement. Yet the sheer volume of advancing Japanese soldiers ensured that even blind fire found its grim mark. Katsumata successfully navigated the wire, pushed through the opening, and began his ascent up the slope. His company, though being relentlessly shredded by the relentless machine gun barrage, still maintained sufficient momentum as enough men breached the wire. Their strategy hinged on reaching the Marine positions, on closing the distance to engage in the close-quarters combat, where Japanese infantry training with bayonets and grenades was expected to confer an advantage. The critical objective was to bridge the remaining distance, 50 meters, then 40, then 30. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Then, at 0020 hours, a new and devastating element entered the fray as the Marine mortars unleashed their fury. The initial volley consisted of 9 high-explosive shells, each weighing 3 pounds and equipped with impact fuses that detonated instantly upon contact, all arriving within mere seconds of each other. While the explosions themselves were not on the scale of artillery shells, their placement was nothing short of perfect. The diligent mortar crews had meticulously pre-registered this precise spot during daylight hours, calculating the range and deflection with pinpoint accuracy. Now they simply dropped shells down the tubes with chilling efficiency, achieving a devastating rate of 18 rounds per minute per tube, equating to more than 1 shell every 3 seconds from the entire section. The impact area transformed into a continuous maelstrom of explosions, flying dirt, and lethal shrapnel. Japanese soldiers who had been advancing toward the gap were either obliterated or forced to the ground. The very Bangalore Gap, which had been the focal point of their desperate assault, mutated into an inescapable killing zone where survival seemed impossible. Captain Katsumata had already traversed the gap when the mortar bombardment commenced, but the vast majority of his men were still behind him. He glanced back, witnessing the methodical and precise explosions systematically tearing through his company, unit by unit. He now found himself with perhaps only 30 men on the Marine side of the wire, a stark contrast to the 200 men who had initiated the assault a mere 15 minutes prior. Resolutely he turned back toward the Marine positions and continued his arduous climb. There was no alternative. The mission was to achieve a breakthrough. He would either succeed in breaching their defenses or perish in the attempt. On the Marine front line, Sergeant John Basilone commanded 2 machine gun sections, strategically positioned to cover the primary approach route up the ridge. He oversaw 4 Browning M1917 machine guns, water-cooled 30-caliber weapons, renowned for their ability to sustain prolonged fire compared to their air-cooled counterparts. His dedicated crews tirelessly fed ammunition belts into the weapons with maximum speed, unleashing short, controlled bursts at any discernible movement in the inky darkness below. Basilone moved purposefully between the gun positions, diligently checking for potential jams, ensuring the water jackets remained at optimal temperatures, and expertly directing fire toward the sounds and movements of the advancing enemy. He observed the mortar rounds impacting down the slope, their bright flashes momentarily illuminating Japanese soldiers before they vanished back into the shadows. The mortars were executing their assigned task flawlessly, disrupting the enemy assault before it could consolidate for a final, decisive rush. Nevertheless, some Japanese soldiers continued their relentless advance. He could hear their shouts, could discern individual figures silhouetted against the stark flashes of the mortar fire, relentlessly climbing toward his position with bayonets fixed. Behind Sergeant Basilone's position, Second Lieutenant Joseph Terzi commanded the weapons platoon for K Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment. His 3 M2 mortars had been firing continuously since 0020 hours and would persist until either the Japanese ceased their advance or their ammunition reserves were depleted. His crews now operated with a smooth, almost rhythmic efficiency, their initial apprehension having been supplanted by the relentless demands of repetition and necessity. The process was a practiced ballet. Hang the shell over the tube, drop, fire, adjust, and repeat. The mortar tubes were growing hot, but not to a dangerous degree. They possessed ample ammunition, and every shell they launched into the darkness landed on unseen targets, annihilating men who had never conceived of such an unimaginable fate. Captain Katsumata ultimately reached the final marine wire, with a mere 23 men still alive behind him. The remainder of his 200-man company lay scattered down the slope, either dead, wounded, or pinned down by an inescapable hail of fire. He gripped his sword in one hand and a grenade in the other. The Marine positions were a mere 10 meters ahead. Meticulously dug in, firing emplacements along the ridge line, designed with interlocking fields of fire that rendered further advance almost suicidal. Yet, almost suicidal was not synonymous with impossible, and Katsumata had not endured this far only to falter. He hurled the grenade toward the nearest machine gun position, patiently awaited the ensuing explosion, and then surged forward, screaming fervent encouragement to his few remaining men. A handful followed. Most, however, failed to take more than 3 steps. The Browning machine gun that Katsumata had targeted with his grenade, though damaged, was not destroyed. Its crew, having taken cover during the blast, now returned to their weapon. The gunner spotted movement, traversed the barrel, and unleashed a burst that struck Katsumata in the chest and throat. The Japanese captain fell, his sword still clutched in his hand, dead before he could comprehend the nature of his demise. The men who had followed him continued their desperate charge for a few more seconds, until Marine rifle fire systematically cut them down, one by one. By precisely 0035 hours, every single combatant from Katsumata's company who had managed to reach the Marine defensive wire had been utterly vanquished. The initial offensive intended to rupture Colonel Puller's formidable line had been decisively halted a mere 15 meters shy of the forward emplacements. Yet the Japanese forces were far from conceding defeat. General Yuminasu, at the helm of the 29th Infantry Regiment, launched an assault from the southern sector, and his disciplined troops were now converging upon the wire at numerous points across Puller's extensive front. These were not the frenzied, uncoordinated Banzai charges often depicted. Rather, they constituted meticulously orchestrated company-level offensives executed by highly trained professional soldiers. These combatants possessed a profound understanding of fire and movement tactics and were adept at neutralizing enemy strongholds. They exploited the natural topography with remarkable efficacy, navigating through the protective cover of draws and winding gullies to shield themselves from direct enemy fire. Furthermore, they advanced their own machine guns, employing them skillfully to suppress Marine positions, thereby facilitating the closer approach of their assault teams. Their tactical prowess was undeniable, but they were relentlessly pressing against a defensive network meticulously conceptualized by a commander who had dedicated 24 years to mastering the art of efficient combat. Crucially, this robust defense was bolstered by an array of armaments whose devastating capabilities lay entirely outside the scope of their established military doctrine. The formidable M2 mortars dynamically recalibrated their trajectory. As the enemy offensive intensified, systematically delivering explosive shells along the lower contours of the ridgeline, targeting every location where Japanese forces were observed consolidating. While the mortar section commanders themselves lacked direct visual contact with their objectives amidst the profound darkness, such direct observation proved unnecessary. The astute machine gunners and vigilant riflemen positioned on the forward defensive perimeter possessed an unobstructed view of the precise points where the Japanese were assembling, and they meticulously relayed this critical intelligence, broadcasting ranges and directional bearings. The dedicated mortar crews then meticulously adjusted their fire protocols, unleashing their deadly payloads a mere 50 meters in front of friendly positions, and occasionally even closer. This represented an exceptionally perilous danger-close engagement by any conventional military metric, with rounds landing sufficiently near to friendly troops that an errant shell could tragically claim Marine lives. However, Colonel Pooler had rigorously indoctrinated his personnel to embrace such calculated hazards, understanding that the only viable alternative was the catastrophic prospect of being overwhelmed. The mortars maintained an unceasing systematic barrage, forging an unremitting zone of annihilation that stretched from the marine wire, down the precipitous slope, and into the dense jungle where Japanese reserve units were desperately attempting to advance. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. At precisely Arozo 100 hours, General Nasu committed his formidable second wave of companies, dispatching an additional 1,000 soldiers forward with the explicit aim of capitalizing on any breaches or vulnerabilities that the initial assault might have forged. However, the grim reality was that no such gaps existed. What lay before them were merely the lifeless forms of fallen comrades, the cries of the wounded, and a handful of isolated detachments that had managed to pierce the wire, only to be promptly annihilated by concentrated rifle fire before they could convert their fleeting success into any meaningful advantage. Consequently, the second wave found itself relentlessly advancing directly into the identical storm of machine gun and mortar fire that had so thoroughly decimated their predecessors. These soldiers were undoubtedly valorous and exceptionally disciplined, yet they proved utterly incapable of surmounting the stark, fundamental arithmetic of their predicament. They were compelled to assault an uphill trajectory, navigating a gauntlet of defensive obstacles pitted against defenders who could vividly discern their silhouettes illuminated by the incessant flashes of mortar explosions, and who wielded a volume of firepower far exceeding anything Japanese intelligence had ever deemed conceivable. In this brutal equation, sheer courage proved insufficient. Unwavering discipline offered no salvation. Even the profound will to sacrifice one's life was rendered utterly ineffectual. General Nasu himself was pressing forward alongside his command group, valiantly attempting to exert some semblance of authority over a battle that was rapidly fragmenting into utter pandemonium. He could distinctly perceive the relentless staccato of machine gun fire and the thunderous concussions of explosions. Yet he remained visually oblivious to the precise fate befalling his beleaguered units. Field communications had fractured almost instantaneously, rendering coordinated command nearly impossible. Desperate runners dispatched to the front lines simply failed to reappear, their fates unknown. He had committed well over half of his regiment to this offensive, and to his growing dismay, it appeared they had achieved absolutely nothing of strategic significance. The Marine defensive perimeter, by all expectations, should have long since crumbled. His valiant troops, according to the meticulously laid plans, ought to have been steadily advancing towards the critical objective of Henderson Field. Instead, they were perishing in agonizing numbers amidst the unforgiving strands of the wire and within the pre-designated kill zones extending beyond, systematically decimated by an onslaught of weapons that seemed to manifest their destructive power simultaneously from every conceivable direction. At precisely 0130 hours, a devastating Marine mortar shell impacted directly upon General Nasu's command post, a critical blow that reverberated through the Japanese command structure. The general himself sustained grievous injuries from shrapnel to both his chest and abdomen. He was destined to succumb to these mortal wounds within the ensuing hours, though historical records offer conflicting narratives regarding whether his demise was instantaneous or if he lingered until the dawn of the subsequent day. Regardless of the exact timing, his death unequivocally fractured the coordinated Japanese leadership of the southern offensive. Bereft of central command and strategic guidance, the Japanese attacks persisted, yet they rapidly devolved into an increasingly chaotic and disjointed series of actions. Individual company commanders, bound by rigid military protocols, continued to propel their men forward, driven solely by their initial orders, as Japanese doctrine explicitly forbade independent decisions to retreat or disengage. Consequently, they relentlessly assailed the identical defensive positions that had already successfully repelled numerous prior assaults, and tragically, they perished en masse within the very same entanglement of wire that had claimed the lives of their comrades. By 0200 hours, the once coordinated offensive had fully degenerated into a fragmented succession of isolated company-level engagements. Each of these individual attacks, in turn, was systematically obliterated by the relentless and unvarying torrent of machine gun fire and mortar barrages that had already annihilated all preceding efforts. The Marines were not securing victory through a perceived superiority in valor, or through more intensive training regimens. Their triumph was, instead, a direct consequence of their overwhelmingly superior firepower, which had been meticulously positioned and expertly wielded. Every single Japanese soldier who managed to reach the defensive wire was neutralized before they could even contemplate breaching the formidable fortifications. Furthermore, every Japanese unit that attempted to consolidate for a renewed assault was mercilessly fragmented and dispersed by precision mortar fire before it could effectively synchronize its attack. The ingenious weapon that Edgar Brandt had conceived and engineered in Paris 23 years prior was now performing precisely as its inventor had intended. It was preserving the lives of friendly infantry by utterly devastating enemy infantry formations long before they could ever close the distance for hand-to-hand combat. At 0300 hours, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hall was issued critical directives to advance his 3rd Battalion of the 164th Infantry Regiment to reinforce Colonel Puller's beleaguered positions. Hall's command consisted of United States Army troops, specifically National Guard soldiers hailing from North Dakota and South Dakota. While these men had undergone rigorous training alongside their Marine counterparts, they possessed no prior combat experience before the unfolding events of this very night. Indeed, a degree of skepticism had circulated among some Marines regarding the capacity of National Guard units to withstand the rigors of actual battle. Hall's battalion was now poised to unequivocally provide an answer to that very question. They pressed forward through the pervasive darkness, meticulously transporting their own M2 mortars and vital ammunition, subsequently establishing their defensive emplacements on Puller's exposed flanks. The relentless Japanese forces would undoubtedly subject their resolve to a severe test within the next 60 minutes. Maruyama, who was orchestrating the operations of the 2nd Division from his distant headquarters situated several kilometers to the south, possessed no precise or reliable intelligence concerning the calamitous events unfolding for his assault troops. He was cognizant that the offensive had been initiated, and he was aware that the casualty figures were alarmingly substantial. However, he remained tragically unaware that his meticulously planned assault had, in fact, already met with complete failure. Japanese military doctrine, characterized by its unwavering rigidity, mandated the relentless continuation of attacks until either outright success was achieved or the fighting unit was utterly annihilated. Consequently, he transmitted fresh orders to the front, committing his entire reserve regiment to the ongoing assault. These directives eventually reached scattered company commanders, who, in turn, continued to propel their men forward into an unceasing deluge of machine gun fire and mortar barrages that showed no signs of abating. By over 400 hours, the 2nd Division had sustained a staggering toll of over 2,000 casualties and had failed to advance more than a paltry 30 meters beyond the defensive wire at any point across Puller's extensive front, while the assault was destined to persist for several additional hours. Its ultimate outcome had, in all practical terms, already been irrevocably determined. The innovative weapon designed by Edgar Brandt had fundamentally revolutionized the dynamics of infantry warfare, a profound transformation that approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers had tragically ascertained in the most brutal manner imaginable.